The United States is currently Canada's largest trading partner, and Canada is the United States' second largest trading partner. The two economies are highly connected. The common stock index is considered a leading indicator of the business cycles. The S&P TSX Composite Index and the S&P 500 Index are Canada's and the United States' major indices. The most recent 5 weekly returns in percentage for S&P TSX Composite Index and S&P 500 Index were listed in the table below. Okay, so down below here we've got our table. You can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows here where we have an index, we have a return for the TSX Composite. So these look very similar. So I'm just going to highlight here that this is the TSX Composite and this is the 500. So I'm probably just going to refer to these as the TSX Composite and the 500 going forward because they both have S&P. Okay, so we've got some returns for each one of these, and now these returns happened at the same time. So when there was a negative return on the TSX, there was a negative return on the 500, and so on. So these form pairs. All right, so let's have a look at our first question. That's down below here a little bit. It says, compute the location of the 75th percentile of the S&P 500 index weekly return. So we're looking at the 500. So that means that the data that we're going to be dealing with here, let's go back up, is this data here. Actually, to make this even easier working through all these questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to label these ones as X and this list of returns as Y. Later on, we're going to need to do that anyway, so we might as well do that right now. So this question here, because it deals with the S&P 500, we're looking at the Y data. And we're trying to find the location of the 75th percentile. Now, you have a formula for that. The formula looks like this. I'll draw it over on the side here. It's the location of a percentile is equals to n plus 1, n being the number of returns that we have, times p over 100. And so you can see that there's a couple of spots here to put in variables. For example, P, that stands for percentage. So if I want to be dealing with the 75th percentile, then I'm going to be putting 75 in where P goes. Also n is my number of returns or my number of observations. Now you might be thinking that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different observations here. But we're looking only at the Y data. We're looking at the S&P 500. So we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 returns there. So it's going to be 5 plus 1. So now I can quickly work this out, actually. Let's have a look at this. This is the 75th, or the location of the 75th percentile is 5 plus 1, so that's 6, times 0.75 over 100, or sorry, 75 over 100, that is 0.75. And so if you work this out, it gives us an answer of 4.5. Now, normally what we would do is we would carry on after this point to figure out what that means, and I'll talk about that in a second. But as it stands, this is our answer. They asked specifically for the location of the 75th percentile, which is exactly what this formula does. It gives us the location. It doesn't tell us what the percentile is. It only tells us where it's located. So we're done. This is the answer to this question. But if we did want to know what it actually was, let me show you what that means. Now, the first thing we would have to do, if you want to find the location of a value within a distribution of data, you have to put the distribution into order, either from lowest to highest or highest to lowest. The data has to be ordered. And I think, fortunately, in this case, we've already got that. So for our Y data, negative 2.2 is the lowest, and then 0 is a bit higher, 0.1 is a bit higher again, and again, and again. So our data is in order. So what we're looking at here is our first value, our second value, our third value, our fourth value, and our fifth value. If the location of the 75th percentile is 4.5, that means it's not the fourth number, it's not the fifth number, but it's halfway between these two, the fourth and the fifth numbers. And if you want to find halfway between two numbers, you can take the average of those two numbers. So Let's try that one out. Let's say 1.2 plus 1.7 over 2. So I'm just taking the average of these two numbers. What would that give me? Let's see. 1.2 plus 1.7. That gives me 1.45. This is the actual 75th percentile. Now keep in mind, they didn't ask us for this. I'm just going a little bit further. We've already answered our question. The answer is 4.5. That's the location. So located halfway between the fourth and the fifth number is the value 1.45. That's one way of finding the halfway point between the two of these. Another way of finding the halfway point would be to start off at 1.2, and then we're going to add half of the distance between these two numbers. So that's 1.7 minus 1.2. So let's see, what does this give us? This is going to be 1.2 plus 0.5 times the distance between these two is 0.5. And so we are left with 1.2 plus, let's move down a little bit here. We've got 1.2 plus a half times a half, that's a quarter. And this ends up giving us 1.45. So that's the same result. So we would say, if they had asked us for this, the 75th percentile of the S&P 500 is 1.45. So the actual answer is simply just 4.5. That's the location of the 75th percentile. The actual 75th percentile is 1.45, but this is extra. We didn't need to do this. I just wanted to explain what normally would happen if you were going through textbook questions. They usually are interested in this one, which is why you might have been confused when we stopped right here, because they only asked us for the location.